Looking ahead.
So as we look ahead, one of the things we've been talking about quite a bit is GDPR and obviously how it's evolved over the last 2 years that it's been out in force. Barry came across a report this past week that just checks in with its status and its evolution, some of its cases. Tell us about it, Barry.
Yeah, so GDPR, for those who don't remember, is a data privacy law and regulation that came into law in the EU about 2 years ago. And it's called the General Data Protection Regulation, as to be expected. And it's widely regarded as one of the world's toughest kind of legislations around data privacy. So when it came out, there was a huge kind of upset and an uproar about it, about how strict it was and kind of what new things it brought into play. And so I thought it'd be nice to look back on the first 2 years and see what has happened with the GDPR and has that changed the way people think about data privacy around the world. What's interesting for me, Chad, is that in those 2 years, they've only handed out 2 fines so far. The first one, quite a small one, of 51,000 euros to Facebook Germany, and then a much bigger one, 50 million euros to Google France about Android. But for 2 years, only having 2 fines in place really does show how difficult it is to actually get these tech companies to pay up and actually win those legal battles.
Yeah, that's the right question to ask, Barry, because what is the point of this institution if those are the only fines? I'm sure there's been loads of breaches. Just one that I can think of this past week was EasyJet and how hackers came in and got 9 million customers worth of travel itineraries, email addresses, various other things as well. And so obviously for future flights and privacy planning and that kind of stuff, they had to then contact every single one of those people and remedy the situation. But surely loads of other breaches coming through. Why do you think there haven't been more fines?
Yeah, so based on what I've been reading and kind of the gut feel around why this happened, it's because these things take so long, right? Even if you can prove a breach and you have to go through the whole legal system, and a lot of these big tech companies have these huge teams of lawyers that are incredibly good at what they do and are paid an amazing amount of money to try and avoid these fines actually being enforced. And so a lot of these investigations take a long time, and the actual legal proceedings can take years and years and years. And so I think that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that the GDPR is kind of managed by quite a small organization, which is significantly under-resourced. Someone called the Irish Data Protection Commission. And they don't have like massive resources to be able to chase a lot of these at once. What they have said is that there are lots to come. I think at the moment there's a bunch of different investigations going on. There's 8 going into Facebook right now, 3 into Twitter, 2 into Apple, 2 into WhatsApp, 2 into Google, 1 into Instagram. So there's a lot going on. A lot of those are ongoing at the moment. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in each of those investigations. But unfortunately, the actual commission is quite small at the moment. And when you're fighting against these big tech companies who have lots of money to throw at lawyers, it really is a difficult fight, even if you're on the right side of the law.
Absolutely. I mean, that kind of legislation makes us as consumers feel quite comfortable that there's these regulations out and about, and, you know, we're much happier that these have been implemented. But if they're not being enforced, and these kinds of fines and investigations and actually holding companies accountable for breaches, surely that level of trust and that level of comfort that we have is misplaced.
Yeah, it's hard to know how to feel, Chad. I think you're right. I think that the GDPR does give us some sort of indirect comfort that we think the things are going on, but we actually need to see action. And that's why these fines are so important. If we see these things happening, kind of like we saw with the Harvey Weinstein thing, if we see someone being held accountable, we all of a sudden realize, okay, cool, this is actually being taken seriously and things are actually changing. I think one of the indirect impacts of the GDPR is that it has moved the world kind of sentiment on data. We've seen lots of copycats around the world, especially places like Brazil and India and even in California, have started to change the way they think about data because of GDPR. So hopefully this is kind of the lead domino that really does shift the conversation, and hopefully we see a lot more accountability in the years to come as they get more and more adept at kind of figuring these investigations out, and as some of these investigations run their course over the next couple of years. But it's important that we see that as a consumer, to know that our trust is not misplaced, and to know that this thing actually has teeth at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I suppose the core part of that and why they are not currently able to embark on more investigations and all of those kinds of things is their funding and their setup structure. The question is whether the EU should be throwing more money into these kinds of organizations to hold these types of institutions accountable. But we'll certainly have to see as time goes on. And as it's turned to, I suppose it's a relatively new institution. And surely as, you know, the next decade goes on, it's definitely going to evolve and hopefully become a lot more of a bigger powerhouse in this space. Let's move on to our next segment.
Across the pond.